60 seconds to comply.
I think you'd better do what he says, Mr. Kenny.
You have 60 seconds to comply. This is minute 68. Part man.
Pod machine. All pod. This minute begins with Robocop's vision going fuzzy as he tries to arrest Dick Jones, and ends with Dick unleashing the Ed 209, and we hear our intro audio.
Yeah, that was my one of my footnotes. Is familiar noise towards the end there.
Dick unleashing is two words I don't really like together.
Well, not in public, no.
Yeah. I saw a Robocock yesterday. It was very good.
In the wild, or?
Yeah, it was on the ocean, actually. This is you know what? I'm not going to tell you any more context. I'm just going to give you that, and it's a mystery.
It's just there bobbing along.
Yeah. No, went to Cottesloe. Very nice beach, and there's all these sculptures by the sea.
Sculptures by the sea, yeah.
And there was there's this rock jetty cliff thing, and so there's all these other statues that are just where the usual shoreline is, and everyone's swimming there. Then you walk much further out, and there's this big sculpture, and we couldn't quite see my mother and I, we couldn't quite see what it was, so we walk all the way up there. And yeah, there's a crowd around it. I don't know, there's such a crowd around this particular one. Maybe it's because it's a very narrow jetty, so it's making a bit of a bottleneck. Speaking of bottleneck, we finally get to the statue, and it is a towering chrome phallus. It is just... It's got the balls at the bottom, like three-dimensional, 360. It's just the etching out. It's hard to tell. If you were ever, maybe a kid in the 90s especially, and you made the little Christmas trees out of newspapers, so you would fold, every single page that was kind of pointed at the top.
No, but I can get it, yeah.
Yeah, it's one of it had multiple pages of the phallic shape, you see. So it was a 360-degree phallus. Anyway, that was excusable, but then you look at the very top, and there's this sort of a bubbling tower of chrome, and this sort of, bubble shape.
Like a spurt.
Like a spurt, a spout, if you will. And, my mum and I just looked at it and went, yep, that's a metal dongus. That is a Robocock. So if you want to see the Robocock that we always end each episode with, go to Cottesloe.
Sculptures by the seamen.
Very high class show we run here.
Speaking of Dick, so my first note is Dick Jones ... smug git. He's
in his element. He's wanted this for so long. Could even be before Robocop existed.
Yeah, I guess this is the he's got his direct revenge on Morton. And now this is more like just getting rid of the nuisance that, that's been plaguing him, so he can finally get his Ed 209 out there. That interest, the Ed 209, is pretty iconic.
It always feels like, so you got the old man who's sort of like the paternal figure, you see. And then you've got Dick and Morton, kind of Dick and Bob. Yeah. They're sort of competing. They're like brothers competing for the father's approval. And
sibling rivalry.
Yeah, and then one presents this giant mecha robot thing, and the other one presents the robot man. And, Dick's not happy that the robot man ended up being the more popular choice.
Well, it actually... the irony is as well, you think about it, is that Robocop actually made it to production and into the field, whereas...
True.
Okay, so if we go by the idea that it took Robocop 3 months of... from Murphy to public release, 3 months. What was Dick doing with Ed 209? I only just thought about this, literally as we were talking, because it's like, we know that Ed 209's buggy. Did Dick even bother to fix this?
He was riding it around in his own little rodeo, and he puts the little cowboy hat on, and yeah, he was just fucking around. I think he had a lot of money, and they were ahead of schedule. And...
Well, it's funny now that I think about it, that so the main quirk with Ed 209 at the beginning was that he locked onto Kenny, which he thought was a threat. The threat got eliminated when Kenny threw down the gun, and then it still proceeded to kill the fuck out of Kenny.
I never wrote this down. I was gonna write this short story about Kenny, and so he seems like this really innocent guy on the outside, but then you get so I'm just gonna like recap everything that happens in the scenes that he's around, and just the inner monologue in his head, and he's just an absolute monster, and he's planning on taking over the corporation and all of that, corporate espionage. And so actually Ed 209 was right all along. He was a corporate spy, so he was actually justified.
Are you just Ed 209 splaining here?
Yes. I'm apologizing for Ed 209. He did nothing wrong. He knew what he was doing. I mean, maybe lethal force was a bit much for corporate espionage, but hey, that was programmed into him.
Let's face it, if corporate espionage was going to be met with lethal force, I think everybody in that room would have been mowed fucking down.
Yeah.
Including Dick, and probably definitely including the old man.
Yes.
But the point I was getting to is that we don't know
sorry
about
to derail
this. No, I love it, but the point I was getting to is that we don't know in context that in the movie at least that Dick was doing anything with Ed 209 to fix it. Did he even think that Ed 209 needed fixing? I mean, it was just a small glitch in his, Did Dick even bother? Because I guess after this, we don't see Ed 209 glitching. I mean, we're going to get to this in a couple of minutes, but the only way that Ed 209 has failed in this next kind of scene is like he can't walk down a staircase, which is more a design fault than a glitch,
that's mechanical failure, not software.
Yeah, that's it. It's still very childlike now, but it's following instructions now quite clearly. The only issues with Ed 209 essentially moving forward feel more of a mechanical issue than the software, which is probably what caused the casing. So
although when I think of Ed 209 having a voice, and I know it has like that, you have 60 seconds. No, the voice in my head when I watch him in this scene is Patrick from SpongeBob. Wait, you just stay there, man. I'm just gotta one step at a time. Just hang on.
Oh, Jesus. But even like at the end of the movie when Ed 209 stops Robocop in front of the in the OCP building, it's not like he was just doing his job. It's not like it was there. He hadn't opened fire on Murphy or anything like that.
What if Ed 209 is the same kind of tortured soul that Robocop is? Maybe he wasn't born a human man, but he dreams of having the freedom of a man.
Or maybe instead of using a human brain, they used a puppy dog.
You know what makes sense? Actually, he's probably a dog. Yeah.
Yeah, it's part dog, part machine, old Ed 209.
Well, actually, no. This is in the next minute. I won't. No, we gotta focus on this minute. I'm gonna make it.
We should focus
Yes. Well, there's a lot to talk about in this minute, but one thing.
This got a lot of stuff going on this particular scene.
Yeah, even in the Roboflag minutes, there's actually a fair amount to talk about. Thank God. Makes it a little easier. But, yes, there's 44 seconds in after Dick says there's still a little fight. There's a little... The audio goes weird, and there's this sound, there's a whisper, another voice saying, "in you." And I was like, well, if that's ADR... that's really bad ADR. Why would it be... It didn't even sound like Dick Jones. It was really quiet, totally different tone.
Yeah, well, it's during the glitchy part of Robocop's vision, so I think it's might be one of those things where because it's a POV shot.
Yeah, is it a POV?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I'm just looking at it now, so I think it's one of those things where it's just inconvenient timing and the glitchy video.
So we think it's intentional.
I'm saying it's intentional, in the sense of like I think they were just trying to glitch it out, but I think it was just unfortunate.
Yeah, it doesn't sound very convincing. I think for me, I would have added maybe a little extra noise or something, like a little click or a static.
I don't know. I've never spotted it, but I think it's if you think it's maybe that it was deliberate to be disorientating, because it is the POV of Robocop, essentially shutting down.
Mm.
It is interesting that Dick does go on about how like immediate shutdown, and this is a conceit in a lot of movies. I find this whole thing of like the robot shuts down immediately, but it's still it's worse in the remake. I don't get to that, but it's that thing of like you're going to be shutting down, and but then like 5 seconds later he's completely fine. The fight between Air 209, Robocop's not glitching anymore, and then this is why I think it's weird about the Directive 4. Maybe it's just a thing when he's trying to arrest Dick is when he's going to be starting shutting down, but as soon as he desists, doesn't stop. I can't remember if I brought this up last minute or not, but yeah, it's interesting how ill-defined it is, but that could just be like Dick Jones's take on the Directive, because I don't think we ever actually see the Directive terminology on screen. It just says Directive 4.
Yeah.
It doesn't come up with like protect the innocent.
Yeah, I was trying to open the video to have a look, but no, this computer cannot multitask. We can record, but we cannot watch videos. That's just dreaming too big there.
We also we don't see basically the programming. I mean, if let's face it, this is just a display, heads-up display, which wouldn't even call it HUD back then, maybe, like, or at least the filmmakers probably had no idea what that kind of...
I think heads-up display goes back quite a ways, especially, it was definitely around in the 80s in science fiction at least. But the term might not have been in mainstream usage. Yeah,
that's what I'm saying. I don't think the filmmakers would have maybe thought about it as the way. They're just thinking of it like as a storytelling device.
It is interesting talking to people who lived through certain time periods, especially the 80s, because I do watch a lot of 80s stuff. And so I will make references to, they had car phones back in the 80s. And Mum went, no, they didn't. Yeah, they did, Mum. Yeah. No, that was a 90s thing. Yeah. No, Mum, I watched friggin' Miami Vice. You see car phones all the time.
Oh, yeah. They were corded and everything. They just looked like a regular phone, but they were usually...
either Mum's just forgetting because, it's been 40 years, or you just didn't really see them around here that much until maybe the 90s.
Oh, no, they were very much a rich person's play toy, or, they might...
I'm absolutely fascinated by them, though, because they don't really work like phones. They're not really mobile phones. There's no mobile towers, so... how they work, I can't even wrap my brain around it. I guess it's more like radio than anything, but yet you can call a phone line, and I don't know. It didn't work well, I'll tell you that much.
No, I think there was some cell tower infrastructure, depending on, probably say, California, LA. That might have had some structure, but that's because that's the only thing I can think of. I haven't done the research.
Yes, if it shows up in any of the movies I review, well, I will definitely do a deep dive into it.
I mean, I guess for a cop show, it's the maybe it's the equivalent of a just a handset, instead of the old hockey puck on a string kind of look. But I don't know. I know they existed, but I don't know the technology behind it. I'll put it that way. Maybe just had like a really, 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 really long cord.
So Murphy in this scene, we should call him Murphy because I think he is more present.
I think he's still getting there personally. Maybe when we first see the eyeball, I think that's when we find.
But the fact that he doesn't stop fighting, he keeps pushing against his own body, and I guess he could really dissect even just that concept of it's a beautiful metaphor for the entire story of the human will inside of him is so strongly resisting the programming and the mechanical form that he finds himself in.
Oh, I think you just nailed it right there. This essentially is the movie's thesis statement to a certain degree. This is, literally the battle between man and machine, the internal battle versus the external battle between Robocop and the corporation. The in many senses.
Damn, I want to make this into a statue, a sculpture, or a painting. It's just there's so much depth and meaning.
Yeah, see, I was talking about this the other night, and with a bunch of strangers, and talking about movies, and it's I said Robocop is one of those movies that sounds goofy, and it does. I mean, that's part of the things that even Ed Newmeyer and I keep talking about when they were trying to sell it. But they created this in-depth, beautiful piece. It's got satire, it's got critique, it's got irony, and it's one of the reasons a movie like this keeps surviving and still keeps being relevant. Well, let's just face it, like, capitalism and corporate culture has really shown its arse in the last few years, especially during the pandemic, and movies like this still feel even more relevant. There's this idea of fighting this corporate assholes that just wants to exploit us.
Yeah, it's kind of sucks that nothing's really changed. The fashion might have changed, but capitalism hasn't, even though the world around it has changed. No. But tone. There's something about Robocop's tone. There's nothing other than maybe Starship Troopers, obviously. And maybe Total Recall, but there's something about them that it beautifully balances that range of tones. And so I think the reason why we care so much about Robocop is that we're allowed to, that there are very human, emotional moments of pathos, but it's also surrounded by satire. And especially in the next minute, you do see it's intense, there's action, there's risk, there's drama. It's also hilarious.
Yes. Well, yeah, it's funny because I've probably been so. We've spent a good, let's say, half an hour or so of this movie building up this character to be this ultimate badass. The guy that just walks into a room full of people blazing guns and does not flinch. It could be the cocaine, but it's it's great establishing just how powerful this character is. And now we're seeing him crippled by the system, specifically by the system internally, and like Dick Jones himself. And he gets literally the shit beaten out of him in the next few minutes. So all I'm getting at is that Robocop is a Greek god, and no, but it's great mythology. Like, the Greeks would love this kind of shit. Like, this whole idea of, like, the Sisyphean tasks and,
I'd love...
I don't know where I'm going. It's early morning, I'm barely awake.
See, I'm wide awake right now. I feel like I'm on a roll because I'm a morning person. I normally get up at 10 to 5 to go to work. So, I'd love to know, get someone from the ancient Greek Empire or something like that and show them Robocop, and what do they think of it? Could they even wrap their minds around it? I don't think they could.
Well, it's funny because there's also, quite deliberately, thanks to Paul, Christian symbology. Like, Robocop is akin to Jesus Christ. We will definitely talk about that later on in the movie because there's a bit that's a little bit too blatant.
It's almost... I can't wrap my mind around... these days... everything's a reboot, make-all, and so, it's generally studio approaching a scriptwriter to make something. But something like Robocop is just, it's the scriptwriter who's pitching an idea to a studio? What? And they picked it up?
Well, the 80s were an insane time in movie making for just new and creative ideas. And that's the sad thing. Modern day franchise and all built off these especially a lot of 80s properties and the 90s and a bit of the 70s as well. Like, Star Wars is still an enduring property, but so much stuff now is just like rebooting or updating a lot of 80s stuff. And the 80s renaissance, or not renaissance, what would you call it?
It is sort of a renaissance.
Nostalgia. Yeah, this 80s nostalgia kick has been going on for almost a couple of decades, realistically speaking. There's just like so many toy lines and stuff that just keep on coming back.
Yeah, I feel like I was born in a really weird time. So the 90s was very much this kind of moody, I don't know, reaction to the 80s. The 80s was all fun and bright and all that.
Yeah.
And then growing up, watching Seinfeld and stuff and just thinking of the fashion's so drab and colorless and although I will say Star Trek The Next Generation,
Well, shit. It's exactly what I was hoping to spare you from.
that Enterprise still looks pretty timeless because they went a little bit more, neutral and stuff. Although Wesley Crusher's outfits maybe. But other 90s things were pretty cool.
I still like Wesley's rainbow shirt. I still think that's his best costume.
It's pretty great. I would wear that. But yeah, most things in the 90s were, grungy and dark and all of that. And then 9/11 happened, and then it was just this period of nostalgia, and we've never left that. And I've been trying to see if there's anyone's written an essay or something about it, because I think there's a lot you could talk about, probably, because it is almost like this collective trauma that the Western world never really got over. And you see that with individuals as well, that after a traumatic incident they will want to look into the past or retreat into the shows and stuff that they loved growing up or whatever it is. And it almost feels like we do that on a collective level. And it feels we do that on a collective level as much as we do it on an individual level, which is very fascinating.
So there is another theory. I remember reading this a long time ago. This is like, over 10 years ago, which was originally to explain like that first wave of 80s nostalgia rebooting. This is about early 2000s. So again, that's what I mean. It's like this... definitely like post-Wedding Singer, but before like this current wave of like fetishism of franchising. The idea was that the about 2000s, the people who grew up in the 80s, like these new 50-year-olds essentially, people who are they were growing up in the 80s and 90s, are now the new executives or the new young executives in a lot of these like corporate entities and like Hollywood and all that. And so they were reaching back to the past, to their nostalgia, and like growing up for like, this is why like movies like Transformers got greenlit and things like, because there's this idea of like, there's all these old franchises, there's old properties that they grew up and loved, and they want to see brought back. And
that makes it, like, you look at in the 80s, there's so much 50s stuff. There's so much, Christine or Crybaby or Grease is that late 70s or is that 80s?
Grease. Yeah, no, Grease was late 70s, but yeah, it was a throwback. So there's always been
American Graffiti.
They call it the 20-year cycle. Yeah, there's this idea of the 20-year cycle, especially applies to fashion. I know that. But I think even like in entertainment, there's always this kind of cyclic 20-year thing. And again, so we're getting almost, this is what I'm saying, we're almost getting this return again to the 80s, because it's been 40 years. So
sorry, there was doing research for Christine, there's an interview that Stephen King gave at the time, and he said, well, 1947 has become a quite respectable year to be born as a creator, as a writer, as a director. I'm like, oh yeah, that's a really good point. That I guess what we're saying here is just it's all about who's in charge of making and telling these stories. And I don't think there's in that sense. It's this generational thing of, well, I love Transformers or Robocop or whatever, and I want to pass that on to the next generation, although the final product is not as wholesome and well-intentioned. But the psychology that motivated the inception of that idea, it's fairly noble and very human.
Yeah, I think that the problem we're getting at the moment, and this is why I think we're getting this just repetitive cycle of this nostalgia, is because I truly think after the 90s, we stopped
trying.
It's hard to... Yeah, no, we did stop trying, but it's hard to establish what was the thing that separated, say, the 2000s to the 90s in regards to... the fashion trends almost were like... just set in stone, has been set in stone for the last 20 years. Yeah,
I mean, if you look at this, the Y2K aesthetic, which is that very much that in music video, bright colors, really not quite cyberpunk, but very much futuristic. And that didn't really exist in the everyday world. That was the fantasy. That was not what people were wearing day to day. But yeah, I really do think 9/11 was that cultural shifting point.
They do say it was the day that America lost its innocence. I think it's more that they woke up to the bitter realization that, wow, maybe the world thinks we're assholes, and they've kind of lent into that.
Yeah, it does seem there's this shift to a more, I don't know, it kind of split off into two camps, and it reminded of all the South Park episodes that came out around that time. Was either people were aggressively, violently jingoistic and patriotic and whatever word you want to use for that, and then the other people who became apologetic for being American, and there was no middle ground, and it feels like that just perpetuated, with COVID, with everything else that's happened in those past 20-odd years. It's just divided their culture, and we are consuming American culture, so it just spreads like a virus.
I think that's one of the worst things. I hate to say it, because I do love American culture, and I love American media. I love superheroes. I love this.
I have a lot of friends who are American.
Yeah, but so I don't think it's necessarily. I think the jingoism is definitely an issue there, but I think it's interesting that. Culturally speaking, that it's like there's always going to be trends, but there doesn't seem to be like these dynamic shifts compared to, like, we can define the 80s, we can define the 70s, and we can define necessarily the 90s, but the last 20 years it doesn't feel like there's been that much. There's been technological advances. We've had the rise of the mobile phone and touchscreens and all this other stuff, so technology is advancing, but it's hard to imagine what the cultural shift has been.
Yeah, because I review on my other podcast, Tron Legacy and Prometheus, movies that came out in 2010 and 2012. And other than technological limitations, watching the behind the scenes making Clue, the DH Jeff Bridges, and you're, oh my god, the technology was so primitive. But actually looking at what people are wearing, what they were doing, not much has changed. It might, Instagram didn't exist, for example, but people were still taking selfies. People were still uploading things on things. The platforms might have changed, but essentially for the past 20 odd years, we've been doing the same thing.
We've seen the rise of social media more so than anything else, and I think that I don't want to say that the culture is still stalled or anything like that. I'm not that kind of doomeristic and thing. I don't think we're all it's going to shit.
Oh, yeah, there's certainly been changes, and I think social justice.
Oh yeah,
social justice is probably been the biggest shift in the past 10 years. We went from saying faggot to maybe that's not okay to say.
But that's also that's again cultural shifting. Like, this is like the difference in seeing the 1950s, 1960s, and 1970s for say racial justice in America. It's still quite shit, but it's not quite as shit.
Yeah, I mean, it actually amazes me how much it's changed. And talking to kids in school now, and just it never occurred to me to make fun of someone for being queer or whatever.
Yeah, I think that's brilliant. There needs to be more of that, and the problem is it's usually the assholes who just want the right to be an asshole to everyone. It's just like, no, fuck you.
I think the hipster movement was another sign of this weird, non-specific Wes Anderson-esque nostalgia. Like every subculture now, other than maybe the e-girl, e-boy thing, a lot of it is a callback to something else.
We need an e-thought for president.
They will know the future.
This is the future the Liberals want.
Anyway, getting back to Robocop, although I think all of that was relevant to discussion. Ed 209. I think we've mentioned the Corridor Digital. They have done a visual effects breakdown of Ed 209, and. I see a little bit of motion blur on Ed 209, and I'm wondering, is that stop motion? Is that go motion? Because it does move very well.
It's always, my brain always thinks to when I think stop motion. This is one of the things that come up point, but I'm thinking, I remember the old Ray
Harryhausen.
Ray Harryhausen. Harry
Yes.
Rayhausen, I was going to say. No, that's not right. Yeah, I love those old special effects because,
Bear in the Big Blue House, and I don't know.
but like those were like these top of the line things, but when you look back at them, they look a little bit jilted, and a lot of that was because there was no motion blur, which is something because we've got almost a century of 24 frames a second creating motion on screen. Like, we don't see motion blur in real life because, again, we don't have limited FPS. But we've mentally been trained to detect motion blur subconsciously. So for animation to sometimes work, you need an motion blur. And cartoons used to do that by blurring, not necessarily the blur in the figure itself, but old 2D paint cells. They would distort the body, so like it gives that sense of motion. This is when you get the animation kicking me coming out of it. So I don't think I've ever picked it up. I pick up the stiltedness because I know it's a thing, but I've never noticed the motion blur, and it's probably there because this is like incredibly well done. Phil Tippett and his crew and all that did a tremendous job. So it is
an incredibly detailed model. It moves really well. And the only thing is that I can tell that it's small, and I don't know what it is. I look at that, I never believe it's big, and maybe it's because it moves too fast. If you look at a big, like industrial equipment, it's not going to accelerate like a small car. You got this big, earth mover sort of thing, digger.
Yeah, I think this becomes a worst effect in the remake when you've got the Roboflag versus floaty battles at the end, and everything is floaty and moving very quickly, and it's just really shit. At least what I like about this one is that it's still a bit stilted. Well,
that works really well for a robot. I think stop motion. If you're going to do stop motion for any kind of character, robots are going to benefit the most.
Yeah. So I'm not sure if I brought this up literally last year, but this time last year. But there was 2 scales of Ed 209. There was a 1-to-1 scale made that obviously didn't move. It was just a static prop, and that was mostly for like lighting and stuff like that, and scale. And then of course the smaller scale, which they used to animate. And they've blended these two really well, ultimately, in this scene and the aforementioned.
I'm surprised that they haven't done robots in actually real robotics for stop motion in movies. So instead of having to just frame by frame move a puppet, you make it basically a remote control animatronic kind of puppet. I mean, sometimes you do get like full size puppets, robotic ones that are interacting with the cast in real time. But I mean, when you are making a full-on stop-motion movie, I guess the technology isn't there yet to make them tiny enough. But it will be interesting if one day you can make, like a little 12-inch doll, and you can just program its movements in and just record that.
Well, you're definitely dealing with something with issues with scale. And here's the thing: the technology does exist. It's probably just easier to hand animate some certain things and easier to.
It's definitely cheaper than doing robotics, but, these big Hollywood movies, they got the budget for sure.
So there was a movie in the 90s called The Abyss. James Cameron. There's a scene, and so this is what I mean, the technology does exist. So there's a scene where you've got the underwater craft flying through space, but they're basically, it's underground, it's swimming through the water, going to thing. That was all computer-controlled stop-motion animation. So the camera was rigged because it's a panning shot. I can't remember. I think it's pan tilt, and I don't think it's a zoom. I can't remember. It's been a while. But it's basically this just gigantic soundstage with all the props. And so the camera, it was designed that once they set it all up, every single time they clicked the shutter, the computer reset moved everything to the next position. So it was like all these different ships. Here's where it gets really insane. So there's a little pod that's piloted by Mary Elizabeth see her face. she's got one of those weird last names, and Mary Elizabeth, her character is parting, and you see her face at the front of the thing. So they shot her parting away. They projected it onto the screen in front of this model, and that would step with the shutter and all the animatronics. So it was all mechanically moving, all these pieces mechanically moving. Lights, I think they had some smoke just for diffused light because it's underwater. And so it took them a while to do it, because it's a lot of setup, a lot of programming, a lot of things to get right, make sure it's all done. But it was all done shot by shot by shot, and all the computers were in charge of moving everything to make sure it was all in the shot and everything like that, and stepping forward. It was the only way they could do it, so they could get a practical live video in the animatronic. It's amazing, but it's expensive.
Yeah, that's why CGI kind of disappoints me, because if you have any issue, we'll just do it in a computer. And I know, animation has its particular challenges and it's not easy, but it's standardized. No. There is a standard solution. Okay, we need to animate a creature with fur. Oh, well, we'll use this software and we'll do this, that, and the other. And there's a way to do it that every student of animation is learning and every professional is putting into practice. Whereas...
Well, I think Adam Savage talked about this in one video like a year or two ago, and it was about a matter of like the early 3D modelers had to learn from animators how to do certain things. So it wasn't a matter of like they were trying to take over their job, it's just that they needed that industry knowledge on how to achieve certain looks and how to achieve
whereas in that, back in the day, just explaining the scene in the Abyss, you could have done that in a day or less with CGI, but no, doing it the practical way you have to come up with all these really interesting solutions and ways of tricking the camera, and I find that much more fascinating.
I think the other thing is like a practical model of like a ship and everything, more often than not looks better practical than a CGI thing. So CGI, I think, does best nowadays for environmental effects, like extended sets, all that stuff. But I still think practical vehicles and practical effects like blood effects, stuff like that, have never been more perfected than a practical effect. And I think that's I think, so it's like, for example, a model ship. It's hard to reproduce even just the tiny detail you can get on a model. It getting better. Like, I remember when they first did the Red Dwarf CGI model for the remastered, it looked abysmal.
They did that with Star Trek Next Generation too. It's like, no, just leave the shitty old effects. We're expecting it to look a certain way. And that's something I wanted to talk about. I'll let you finish your thought there.
Yeah. I forgot you haven't used the Star Trek ding in a while. But it's funny because bouncing light off a real object that's got different colored paints and shapes, and how that light bounces off. I'm a photographer, so light hitting an object is something that I'm kind of having to be conscious about, more or less. So like shadows, spectral highlights, all that type of stuff. CGI is getting better and better and better. It's better than it has been, yes, but sometimes that practical thing of building a model and hitting a light off it is going to look 100,000 times better than programming an algorithm to achieve the same thing.
Yeah, it feels like obviously we're expecting things to look a certain way in terms of reality, so we can pick up on CGI quite easily because it's missing something. It doesn't have all the detail that a real thing does. But I think when it comes to, say, Baby Yoda or Ed 209, we don't want that to be perfect. We want a stop motion or a puppet character. It's actually a Corridor Crew was talking about this. They've de-aged Luke Skywalker, and they've that's all CGI. They've put so much computer technology into that.
Yeah,
he's talking to Baby Yoda, who's a puppet.
I wasn't overly thrilled with the young Luke technology.
Honestly, just recast. Just get somebody who looks like Mark Hamill.
Just Get Sebastian Stan
Exactly.
to play Luke Skywalker. The crowd would fucking
Yeah,
go
sometimes the
wild.
old ways are the best ways, and we're sort of in an interesting time, but in a weird time as well, technology-wise, that we're almost there. And you know what? I think young Jeff Bridges in Tron looks better than the de-aged Luke Skywalker, and I don't know why. I think maybe because it's so far removed from reality that you just sort of go, oh, it's a cartoon.
I was going to say, the context of Clue
Context
in
clue, if you will.
Legacy is that, haha. I'm writing that one down. I think the difference is that in the grid, there's supposed to be this level of abstraction, like the color palettes.
It's lit in
and
a
all this
very
sort of stuff.
unnatural way.
Yeah, so I think it's one of those things where it overcomes the uncanny valley to a degree. People
Yeah.
still complained about it, but yeah, whatever. But I think I'm fine with it because, yeah, I'm there going, it's a computer-generated freaking city. Like, I kind of wish... This is why I think, in many ways, the Tron Uprising, how it has that kind of... Like, the people have that weird kind of stretchiness to them. Like
The
they're,
Robert
like,
Valley.
exaggerated
Oh,
names
he's
and
such
stuff like that.
a great artist. He's so good.
Yeah. I was trying to... my brain was trying to say, what the fuck is that?
He changed my life. He did this sort of tutorial video stream thing, and 1 hour video, and now I can suddenly draw faces real good. Wow.
Oh, yeah, but yeah, so I love a little bit of abstraction when it comes to a world where we kind of know it's a bit... these people drive fucking light cycles and fly around in things. It's fine to be a bit weird and stuff like that. I wish Hollywood sometimes would be a little bit more weird.
Anyway, come and listen to Tron in the 60 seconds over in bloody Patreon.
I like that term.
You gotta use it.
Before we go too far into getting into segues for Roboflag, I do have some commentary notes. But before I bring up that, I'm not sure if I brought this up earlier, but it's weird that in the script, there's only 3 directives, and the third directive is the one that's classified. But what's funny, this part of the script, the directives go like this. Directive 1, protect and serve the public trust. 2, uphold. 3, classified. I think there might have been a bit of a typo there. But so what's interesting as well is that in the script, Directive 3 does actually have a name. That name is OCP Product ID 943054BC.
Okay.
Yeah, I have no idea. Cutting to the commentary, they do comment that this and the bathroom in OCP are the only things shot on a soundstage. And Paul actually remarks that, I'll quote him, "This is a really interesting scene between the mechanics and the mind." And yeah, that's definitely there front and center on screen. And I love that.
To do the Ed 209 special effects, they had to rear project, I think it was. So the scene is playing out in front of or before the stop motion thing. I can't remember how it all looks. But Ed in this scene walks out from behind a pillar, so I'm wondering if they had to build part of the set there.
I don't know. I'll have to reanalyze it. So the funny thing is, back projection is how they did Superman flying in the Richard Donner 77 movie. So it's an old technique, but yeah, it makes
Simple
that makes
but
a bit of
effective.
sense. Because, well, that's the funny thing is, you can. I don't think I noticed it so much here, but I think I noticed it more on the earlier OCP scene. Dick kind of goes a little bit in and out of focus depending on the scene transitions.
Yeah, the quality of the film around Ed 209 degrades, and you do see that in the stairwell again, where Robocop a few times looks really out of focus. Well, not really, but fairly out of focus compared to Ed 209, who's very sharp.
Yeah, that's just because of using rear projection, and I kind of I hate to say it, I kind of prefer that if they instead of try to just blue screen or green screen it in.
It's weird though. We seem to like imperfection, or we get used to things looking a certain way. Coming back to that idea, like when Peter Jackson did the higher frame rate for The Hobbit, and all these people complained, and the gamers were saying, well, I play games in however many frames per second, so it shouldn't matter. Well, what's really happening is, well, first of all, not all projectors are made to cope with it. So when I saw The Hobbit in a cinema, an old, not high-end cinema, it was awful. It looked really weird, like everything was underwater and floating. And also, film is different from video games. And I've watched other things in higher frame rates, or I've modified a movie to look that way, it's just as a test. And even though it's not, it's like a, program making it seem like it's a higher frame rate, so it's faking it. It looks weird, and it's everything's moving in, well, it's actually in a more realistic way, but it's like, oh, it's too real. Oh, I can't, because movies look a certain way.
This is where again too with the whole 24 frames per second argument and motion blur is that because we've been trained for so long, and the other reason why it's 24 frames per second is essentially it's the lowest speed we can go that still looks realistic for movie. Animation is different, but it was essentially a budgetary reasons. There was no real reason that they couldn't be shooting at 48 frames per second just to say double the frames back in the turn of the century, except for it just cost double the amount of thing. You have less amount of footage value because you've only got a couple of meters worth of reel, if that.
Yeah, I think some early, not full-length feature films, but there are some early videos, from the 20s, 30s, whatever, where people are shooting in a higher frame rate. Yeah, and especially because of the limited technology, it's even weirder.
Yeah, no, the funny thing is that frame rate had to be standardized essentially, because like all things like this, it needs standardization. But because things were hand cranked, some people would be faster than others. So playing back on a standardized frame rate, a lot of old things just look weird because we don't know what the frame rate was. It could have been something as obscure as 16.5 frames per second.
Yeah, this is, I'll have to look up the channel name. But there's a YouTube channel that remasters and restores old footage. And there's one, the most surreal one I saw, I loved it though, was a guy in this kind of grotesque pig costume, and it's like a little play. He's with this ballet dancer, and the joke is, kind of a Beauty and the Beast type thing, and she kind of bullies him a bit. But they've colorized it, and they've increased the frame rate. So this is a video from about 1910, I think. And so it's so surreal because it's moving fluidly. You're expecting these old videos to be all herky-jerky and stuff, but yeah, again, we get accustomed to things looking a certain way, and when they don't, we freak out.
This is why we have terms of cinematic language, and I think this is why the gamers, TM, really annoy me when they start to do shit like that. It's like, well, I play my games at
it's not a movie, dickhead.
It doesn't affect me. It's like real life, man. It's like, no, but that's not how cinema works. And look, fair go to Peter Jackson for at least trying it. And who was it that did the Gemini Man a couple of years ago with Will Smith? I can't remember. My brain wants to say it was Charlemagne, but it wasn't Charlemagne. Either way, they did this new movie with Will Smith. They released it in, I think, 3 different formats, and there was like a 60 FPS one. Dan Olsen covered it on his channel, and he watched all 3.
Oh, I hadn't seen that.
Yeah, he goes on about the differences, and the problem is that I don't think there is an advantage at this time. There's advantage in resolution, mostly because of detail. But there doesn't seem to be a distinct advantage in ramping up frame rate at this point, is because we're so used to the cinematic language, and if things start to become too fluid, it looks like. Do you remember? It must be about 10 years ago. There was these movies, the new TVs that were coming out, and they had higher frame rate capability, and they had an inbuilt thing that would algorithmically up the frame rate of old movies. It looked bad.
I'd love to have a look at that though.
Oh, I think I saw Live Free or Die Hard, or as an Australian called Die Hard 4.0, because we're terrible. It's not a good film, and the smooth scrolling, I think that's what it's called. Either way, and it hurt my brain to watch. And the person I was watching it with didn't see it. I'm there going, it looks so bad. How can you not see this?
There's an interview with John Carpenter, the last film that he made. I can't remember. It's the one with Amber Turd. No, it was Amber Turd. She was in an asylum. A lot of people didn't see it. It was about 2010, I think, that he made it. And he was just discussing the modern state of technology and filmmaking. It makes a lot of things easier, but I think you have to show some restraint, and it's very easy to get lost in all the color grading and all those fun tools that you have at your disposal. But film needs to look a certain way. We expect it to look a certain way, and the way it looks is not reality, and we shouldn't be aiming for reality.
I am so glad we've moved away from orange and fucking teal color grading. Jesus fucking Christ, that was a bad era for cinematography. We can digitally color things, so we're going to make it all look the same. Anyway, I think we've run out.
Yeah, there's a lot to talk about, but yeah.
And it's been a few weeks. We've had a lot of
life
technical difficulties and reality is cursed. And so, speaking of things...
Gaslighting Robocop.
Alex, how do you feel? I feel fine, Dr. Norton.
Minute 74. This minute begins with Norton saying, "I'd hop to it," and ends with Robocop on his Robocycle, accessory sold separately.
I hate this minute.
Well, see,
I really
feel like
hate this
these 2 minutes are actually as close as we're going to... Well, aside from the scene where Murphy sees what's left of his body, I think this is another one, or 2 minutes, where we are seeing as close to the director's vision as possible. This is kind of the, I guess, thesis, ironically enough. You know, this minute for Robocop is the thesis, and I would say that this one for the sequel, the remake, is sort of close to what they wanted to do. I mean, first of all, I prefer Robocop with the visor down. I think it really helps to... When you see the full human face, it doesn't have the same impact. You're still seeing eyes that you can connect with.
Yeah. I will respectfully disagree. I think the thesis statement was right at the beginning of the movie, like, why aren't we using drones for real?
Oh, no, I mean, what's his name? Jose, I can't remember the director's name. But I feel like this is what he wanted to do. This is as close as we get to...
I think this is what the director was
this is what he was aiming for.
But the problem is that this is a scene where Clara confronts Murphy and tries to awaken his humanity, but the cinematography is...
Everything is so flat in this movie.
In this just parking lot, it's so flat. And it's like everyone's in black, including Robocop and Clara. The framing is bad.
I hate looking at this movie. It's almost like looking at... like a commercial for maybe a housing estate, or, you know, just something really generic.
It's just badly...
There's no pop. There's no pop of color. There's no... You know, film this at night and you could have a lot of, you know, interesting directional light, or you could do it at sunset, or just... Everything is shot on an overcast day, and they haven't done any real post-processing to add any sort of... oomph, some pop, some...
So brown and
neutral.
Gray.
Neutral. The whole movie is neutral.
What is this setting? What is this setting? The police have barricaded for reasons and allowing Clara through, but she's stopping Robocop from... Why?
Film it in the rain. Film it near some traffic lights. Give me some interesting shit in the background.
What is... We know what the purpose of the scene is. The purpose of the scene is to trigger Murphy literally within the next 2 minutes to realize he's a real boy after all. But what this scene does is so badly handled, and it's so...
It's almost funny, actually, because Clara is, you know, just saying, you know, please, I need you back, and our son's having nightmares and all that stuff. Meanwhile, Robocop is just multitasking. He's got other tabs open, and I just insert, you know, distracted husband, nagging wife joke here. But yeah, it felt like it. You know what? If this movie had more self-awareness, it would have made some kind of joke about that. But nope.
Yeah, if if there's some satirical content to this, or anything, my literal note is this scene is just bad. That's all I wrote. It's just so bad.
I know, but the whole movie is bad. So I've gone, how I learned to stop worrying and endure the remake. But yeah, I think there's actually a nice little moment of editing here, where Robocop goes to take off again. So Clara is in front of him, stopped his motorcycle, and so he sits up and he's talking to her, and then he just goes down into the position to ride the motorcycle away. There's a couple of quick edits there which make it seem more abrupt, and I like that, actually. I will give them points where I can see it deserves points, and yeah, that was nicely done.
I have to disagree mostly because
you didn't notice. Yeah,
washes all over me. It's just such a bad scene that, like, yeah, there's...
I mean, we know it's terrible, but we have to talk about it, so I've decided, you know what, I'm going to try and be positive, Simon. We're just going to try and be fucking positive. We're 74 minutes into this shit show.
Do you know what really fucking shits me as well? And I'm going to bring it up, because I'm going to bring it up next week. Literally a minute later, Robocop is of the thing that OCP did to him 10 minutes ago? I don't... Like, time is warped and space is bendable. Like, this... We literally have spent a significant chunk of an hour of OCP robbing Murphy of his humanity and putting him in a fucking tin can. And we're still in that section in the movie.
Yeah.
And in the remake, it's 10 minutes. Like,
yeah,
seriously.
The original film was definitely much more efficient. And I'm wondering, what was the length of the remake a studio mandate? Did they want it to be longer? Is it a foreign market thing? Because I don't see... It barely has enough for 90 minutes.
Well, it front stacked the first half of this film with all the build-up and this creation of Robocop and trying to say, like, oh, yeah, no, he's still... like Murphy, but he's not, but he is, but he's not. And then it's like, oh shit, we have to realize this is fucking Robocop, and we've got to make him out to be Robocop and steal his humanity. Oh, but that's okay. 5 seconds later, he gets it back.
Well, there's no real advantage to changing it from Lewis, who wakes up Robocop, and his wife, and that's another thing that's sorely missing, is that if you are going to have his family present, I think we've talked this before, but if you're going to have his family present, make that mean something. And especially in this scene here, we're seeing, okay, it's his wife, but what is she really doing that his co-worker couldn't have done?
But that was the other thing in the original movie. Like, his family were gone, and it wasn't like Lewis was there going, Murphy, please, it's Murphy, it's me, Lewis, please. It's like, no, she just goes, Murphy, it's you. And it's just that thing of like, again,
really,
subtlety.
It's this subtle recognition of, hey, it's you, and that is just this earth-shattering thing, and it has so much more power that way. But yeah, if it's, I think this, it is actually, I will say, fairly realistic, and I can't remember the actress's name, but she's doing well with it. And I think, this is...
Breeze something or other, wasn't it?
I can't remember. But, yeah,
it's not Brie Larson, I know that.
Yeah, no. But...
Abby Cornish?
Abby Cornish, there we go. And, yeah, I think this is how a wife would react in this situation, and these are all things she would say, but it's just... It's a little too much in terms of movie dialogue, or even just fictional dialogue. I've learned this myself with my writing, going... Yeah, people in real life tend to talk in circles and repeat themselves and all that, but movie dialogue is not the same thing, and less is more, always.
Even to a certain degree, like, as I said, the cinematography and everything is just bad. Like, what's going on in this scene? Because this should be a moment of tension or something, but it's so flat. And what? Did the cops barricade the street so Clara could talk to her husband?
Yeah, I don't get what
is this scene
impetus
saying.
I don't get the impetus for that. Yeah,
it's just bad. Like, god damn it! I think I've just ran through my yearly quota of just this is bad.
Yes,
Like,
we know.
and moving on. I'm not looking forward to talking about the next movie either. Next few minutes either, to be honest.
Well, I think that's basically... Oh, and then they say at the end of the minute, so Klein and Norton are watching, she says, what do you think she's going to do? And he says, what do you think... Well, what's he going to do?
Tropey bullshit. Fucking tropey bullshit. So the funny thing is, I think last minute I a little bit condescendingly said that this feels like it was a movie made by a TV director. Mm-hmm. So after we had a little bit of discussion about like behind the scenes and stuff, I did look a little bit behind the scenes of the remake. And yeah, this director's mostly just done TV. And it's like... I hate to say I called it, but I fucking called it. That's not to say that TV directors can go and make movies. Like, literally, 2 TV directors made one of the most highest fucking selling movies of all time in Endgame.
Yeah.
But even, like, you can see, like, before they discovered cinematography in the later movies, like, Civil War cinematography wasn't the most exciting movie ever.
Actually, it reminds me a lot of this Robocop.
Which is funny because I think Winter Soldier had better cimulatography, and it was still the same director. So it's not to say that a TV director can.
Thinking of all these movies, all I think is concrete, so much concrete.
Yeah, but I look at this and going, we know he had a lot of battles with the studios. He apparently has claimed and recanted this claim that the studio would only listen to like 1 out of every 10 suggestions of his, and so this movie feels like it was made by a committee more than a director. So, autistically, this is just not a movie that they wouldn't hire Paul Verhoeven. I get it right eventually. They wouldn't hire a wacky Dutch guy with crazy auteur motives to make this particular version of this movie.
Well, that's why I think one of the best Marvel movies, I know we keep talking about, it's in the zeitgeist, I guess, but looking at big soulless franchise, MCU is a good example. Some of the best ones, I think, are like Kenneth Branagh and Taika Waititi. Those are really weird choices for directors. James Gunn. Pick these really weird guys who do have their own style, their own aesthetic. Yeah, and I think you end up with a better product. But you have to trust those people, and there's not a lot of trust between studios and directors anymore.
No, definitely not. I love First Avenger. I like that they got Joe Johnston to do it, the guy who made The Rocketeer. So a guy who knows how to make like a 1940s action film. And I think First Avenger is probably one of the better of the Phase 1 movies, to be perfectly honest. Kenneth Branagh's Thor. I love like the Shakespearean pathos, but frankly, the best Thor film is Ragnarok. Because Thor is inherently a silly fucking thing, and I love that they got Taika.
I like that Kenneth Branagh went more Shakespearean, and he also seemed genuinely invested in the lore and the characters of Valhalla, because I think there's a lot of Thor stories that the least interesting thing is all the Asgardian stuff. I should state for the record, I think the reason why Thor, the franchise, worked is because they did take Thor seriously in that movie. I think it was the best, smartest move to do. And we got a great freaking Loki out of it as well. Say what you will. I would love Neil Gaiman to write a Thor script. I think that would be delightful.
He kind of did, because he did his own Norse Gods book a few years ago.
Yeah, he's done it a few times, and there was Odd and the Frost Giants, and then there was there's Loki and Thor and Odin in American Gods, in Sandman. He has a thing for those guys.
Yeah. I'm hesitant about Good Omens Part 2. I know it's based on actual stuff that they did develop for a potential second book, but
I freaking hate the fandom. That's neither here nor there, but the Good Omens fandom annoys the shit out of me.
The funny thing is, the Good Omens book, it's fine.
It's
not
cute.
My favorite Pratchett thing.
Cute.
It's fine. Yeah, I'm not going to do a 3-hour...
We need to end this podcast, but we can talk about that later, yes.
So anyway... on that bombshell, where would the viewers find you?
You can find me at traviandesigns.com, which is still there. The hackers did not get into my website, so that's good.
That's good.
Patreon.com/traviandesigns, The Greatest Regen on Instagram. A little quiet lately. Again, robbery. Kind of had some other things going on.
One of the models was not available for a while. Courtney and Ivy?
Oh, and so my other Instagram is Courtney and Ivy, and Ivy's not around, so I haven't really been doing much on there. Hopefully she'll be back soon. And then Courtney Colson on YouTube. And if you want to chip in a little bit to help me with my, lack of possessions, on my website I do have my coffee and my Patreon. So
yeah, we don't usually hawk the that stuff too much, but I think in this case, if you would love to help support Courtney, please go donate. And if it's just a one-time thing, or go and check out the other podcasts that you produce.
I can use a little help right now. Yeah.
And you can find me on Helios Photos and Fandom Crossing across most of those social media platforms. But more importantly, speaking of social media platforms, go check us out on Simplecast. Maybe not Spotify because they're evil. Apple, Google, wherever your podcasts are podded, go and find them there. We do have YouTube as well. Click, like, share, subscribe, all the other bullshit. Because the algorithm hates us and buries our content.
Just by the way, to either support me or this podcast, you can actually just let these videos run in the background, and through ads, that does help us.
We don't have enough followers for ads, but just direct cash.
Well, I don't know
if you leave a padded envelope full of $10 bills
Yeah.
in a locker in TAFE, I think it's the bottom level 22. Yeah, just put it on top of there. I'll find it.
Yep.
Non-sequential notes only. You know the deal.
Mm-hmm.
And until next time.
How many licks does it take to get to the center of a Robocock?
I just don't want to know about its creamy center.
Eh.